Welcome back at WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively into the crab cake season around here. I'm going to be giving away these Ravens scratch-off tickets on Friday for my 54th birthday. It's my birthday, but you can win. It's all brought to you courtesy of the Maryland Lottery and the Maryland Crab Cake Tour, our friends at Window Nation. You buy two, you get two free. I'm sporting my Window Nation gear here on WNSTV, as well as our friends at Goodwill. It is a big, big week around here. And not the least of which, because it's baseball playoffs week, Padres have a chance. Manny Machado's talking ish. Buck Showalter's out after checking greasy ears and stuff like that. Well, we were all up very, very late watching the Ravens streak back into first place in the AFC North. Luke Jones joins us now. He is, of course, Baltimore Luke and Luke at WNST.net. He'll be in Owings Mills all week as the Ravens prepare for the New York Football Giants. And look, we've discussed Lamar and Justin Tucker and all that. Let's talk a little defense here and about who's on the field and allowing Joe Burrow just 10 points before the last drive, showing stout at the goal line, stopping the Philly special, staying honest on the backside on that play so they didn't wind up going down by 4 points at that point in the game. Defense, not so bueno the last couple of weeks, and certainly 5 losses in a row and all the heaviness of Marcus Peters last week. In the end, defense played pretty well on Sunday night.
It did, and I would even disagree with you a little bit. I thought overall they played pretty well against Buffalo, all things considered, knowing what that Bills offense is capable of, knowing what Josh Allen is. So we've seen progress. There's no question about that from what we had seen in the fourth quarter of that Miami game, which was just so below the bar as far as expectations in this town. But yeah, when you consider what Joe Burrow did, and again, even if we take away the day after Christmas where no Lamar and no Marlon Humphrey and go down the list of all the different guys. And remember, they were having a COVID issue at that point in time as well. So there were so few legit defensive players on the field that day in Cincinnati. So you just, eliminate that. Go back to what happened and what the Bengals did against them in Baltimore or earlier in the season. So I think what really stood out, and this was something that had been talked about going into the game. I know some analytics types that really look at this type of stuff and track this kind of data had noted that Joe Burrow had been less than stellar against too high cover two, two safeties in the back end of the defense playing a little more shell. And we saw the Ravens copy that, and we saw a Bengals team that as a result ran the ball a little bit better than you'd like to see. But at the same time, they did not give up big plays. The big plays that Cincinnati had were the result of a couple broken tackles here and there, right? I mean, really was not a case of Joe Burrow being able to throw the ball deep. In that sense, you really credit Mike Macdonald and this Ravens defense for, kind of going away from what they do. Although we've certainly seen them play more too high safety this year, and that's kind of becoming the trend around the NFL. It's one reason why a lot of people were opining that's a reason why we're seeing scoring down around the league to start the 2022 season. But it was a lot of too high safety, a lot of shell, a lot of keeping things in front of them rather than playing single high and cover zero blitzing and things of that nature. I mean, very, very little blitzing and a lot of too high safety, and worked out well. Again, last drive aside, and certainly the timing of it, the defense wasn't going to be happy about that. But by and large, you go into that game and say, after what Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and the Bengals did against them last year, and say you're going to hold them to 17 points, you'll gladly take that. No question about it. You'll sign up for that in blood. You'll be that happy to do that. So, from that standpoint, it was good to see. Again, the run defense, people will focus on that again. When you're playing a lot of cover two, a lot of too high shell, that's lighter boxes. So, that was something that the Bengals were able to do, which they hadn't run the ball against anyone. So, we've talked about it. The run defense needs to be tightened up. I think they'd acknowledge that, but I also think they're probably not shocked that Cincinnati was able to run on them a little bit because, again, they were trying to take away those big plays, trying to take away those opportunities to throw the ball deep to Jamar Chase. It certainly didn't hurt that T. Higgins was very limited with the ankle. He barely played, so he was a non-factor. But regardless, we know Cincinnati has plenty of weapons that can hurt you, and the Ravens did a really good job overall of keeping things in front of them. And I would agree with you, a nice step for the defense that has been very much maligned. And as I noted in a previous conversation, Lamar Jackson at one point went out of his way to talk about the defense and say, hey, those guys have gotten a lot of criticism, but they picked it up for us because we left a lot of plays on the field. So it was good to see that. And again, late in games, I almost feel we need to come to an understanding that that's kind of how the NFL is. It's kind of morphed into that. It feels like the NBA in that way a little bit. The last 5 or 6 minutes, you're going to see some drives up and down the field for both sides. But overall, again, you hold the Bengals to 17 points and keep in mind that goal line stand, as you mentioned. Say what you want about the play calling on the other side. The Ravens still made stops. And that's why they deserve a lot of credit with the way they played over the course of 60 minutes defensively on Sunday night.
Luke, I think the biggest story is that the ball never went over anybody's head, right? They had a spate of that. That was the problem with the comebacks. First against Miami and Tua, he was all over the place in that second half. But certainly balls going over heads, breakdowns, communication breakdowns on the back end. Now they're going to lose Marcus Williams, right, in the aftermath of all of this. And the way they play, and we're going to talk a lot about this week with Wink Martindale, right? That rambling, gambling. We're gonna blitz you. We're on the most important plays. We're gonna sell out. We're gonna allow Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey to be one-on-one guys. All of that sort of disappears when they're playing too deep, right? Like Burrow, this was a different look for Burrow to have to play the game a little differently. You talked about them running the ball and where they were, T. Higgins not being there, and the whole notion of we're not going to let you go up top and get 7 for free on us. That didn't happen during the game, which is how the game stayed tight. That being said, Burrow had no problem going all the way down the field till they screwed the thing up with the Philly special. It was not the stoutest defensive effort, but it was a different kind of defense. Philosophically, what the Ravens are trying to do in 2022 with Mike Macdonald, very different than what Wink Martindale did here for a number of years.
Yeah. And they're still, let's be clear, it's not as though they've just gone full-blown conservative and they're just playing a lot of cover 2. I mean, there's still plenty of blitzing going on in certain matchups. This was not one of them, however. They certainly played this different. And again, as I noted in Sharp Football, Warren Sharp, his website was even talking about the fact that Burrow's been underwhelming against cover 2 so far this season, whereas cover 3, which is something the Ravens had played more of, he hadn't had as many problems with. So, you've got to mix it up. I mean, we tend to fixate because, and I throw myself in there, there's plenty that I do know about X's and O's as it pertains to the NFL, but there's much more that I don't, and I'm not going to sit here and try to fake it in that way. I know enough to know that I don't know a whole lot, if that makes sense, right? I mean, because it is quite complicated compared to even any of us who played at, the high school level or anything like that. I mean, it's night and day. I mean, it's not even close. They're speaking a different language. But again, this was an ability to adapt. It is a little bit of a different philosophy. And as I mentioned, we're seeing more of that too high around the league. And that's a big reason why people think that scoring is down a little bit to open the season. So we can talk about teams that play in the preseason or don't play in the preseason, offensive line. I mean, there are always multiple variables at work, but I think it was interesting to see the Ravens go out there and basically tell Joe Burrow, we're going to take away the big play from you. And you're going to have to move down the field in a more methodical way. And the Bengals did that on a couple occasions. I mean, take a look at how long their drives were. When you look at how that game played out, I mean, even the goal line stand, I mean, my goodness, that drive was quite a long drive. I mean, how many plays was that? How many minutes was that? And they came away with nothing. That's demoralizing. So there is something.
Well, the Ravens had that last week where it happened a couple times, right? Literally.
Sure. But there is something to be said in terms of when you get in those positions where you have to have a drive that is so long and takes so many plays and you're having to convert on third down. The more plays you have to run, the more third downs you have to convert. That also increases the probability of making a mistake or committing a penalty or turning the ball over. And while the Bengals didn't turn the ball over there was still they came up short and came away with nothing after a drive that lasted just over 8 minutes. So it's a different way of playing. And you look at the final numbers and say, well, they really ran the ball on them. And not to completely excuse the run defense, but I'm guessing, and any football person would tell you, if you are going to play more too high, again, lighter boxes then to run against. So yeah, you're going to pop a couple more runs here and there. So I think the Ravens went into that game saying, you know what? Yeah, we'll let Joe Mixon run the ball a little bit more effectively than he has. If it takes away Jamar Chase's big play ability, if it takes away T. Higgins' big play ability, of course he didn't play, but Ravens didn't know that. Didn't play a whole lot anyway. So you have to figure out how you're going to play stylistically, and you're always going to give something, right? I mean, you're never going to have the perfect defense throughout a 60-minute ball game. So you're willing to concede certain things in order to stop the big play. In this case, talking about Jamar Chase and the Bengals' big play potential that, quite frankly, as much as I say that, on paper they have that potential, it hasn't shown up as much as they would like to have seen it show up early on this season. It's the same way that defenses have to attack Lamar Jackson. What are you going to do? You're going to take away his legs? He can gash you through the air. He's fully capable of doing that, depending on how you're going to play defense. So, you're trying to figure out, you're going to play more man-to-man, you're going to blitz, you're going to play more zone, where Lamar, we know he's so good at finding those windows within zones. So, there's always a hidden cost to anything you're going to do. So, in the case of the Ravens, I think, even though they didn't say as much, and I'm guessing John Harbaugh will acknowledge it a little bit, I'm guessing they went into that one saying, Cincinnati hasn't run the ball worth what all year. We're going to play too high shell. And if they can run a little bit on us, then, hey, that's better than Jamar Chase going off for 170 yards. So that's what happened. And, again, you'd like to clean it up a little bit. And their run defense has been shaky this year. That's something, we've talked a lot about the pass defense, but their run defense hasn't been great. But in a game like this, I'd much rather have a team running the ball on me a little bit than it going over my head. And I'm giving up big plays that are going to wreck the game. And I think the fact that you gave up 17 points compared to what happened against these guys last year twice, I think the Ravens were happy with that outcome.
Well, bend but don't break, right? And then the Philly
Sure.
special play happens and they blow it up. Then Calais Campbell blows up the middle on the little shovel pass and they wind up getting nothing out of it. The linebacking core. I mean, Josh Bynes, you talk about not blitzing much. Don't tell Josh Bynes that, as he ate Joe Burrow at one point coming through the middle on a little bit of a delayed blitz, but certainly was a wide, clean, free shot at that point. And Patrick Queen actually catching the ball this time. And JPP getting in and being disruptive, and how that maybe helps Owa, who is still far too disappearing for me. He is no Terrell Suggs. I've seen Terrell Suggs play, right? But the backside, quiet for a game, and Humphrey got beat. Peters got beat. Tackling is still an issue, I think, throughout the league. I mean, these guys don't practice tackling, so therefore tackling's an issue across 32 teams, not just for the Ravens. But defensively, a little bit of a step up for sure. A better feeling about this defense this week, and not just because of the big plays or actually losing, but just a better overall effort against, T. Higgins aside, a pretty stout team. I mean, Hayden Hurst is a real player. Certainly stopping Jamar Chase and stopping that thing that he's got going with Burrow, that's a legitimate thing. I mean, they should feel good about how they played. I mean, they're 3-2. This was a good week for the Ravens. I mean, problems aside, good outcome, good progress, and I think the headspace of, hey, maybe the O-line will be okay. Maybe Ronnie Stanley can play a little. Maybe we'll get Ajabo back. Maybe JPP's not washed up. Like all of these. Maybe Marcus Peters not going to kill John Harbaugh before so all of these things that happened last week sort of smell better this week, deodorizing when you win a game 19-17.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, that was my big point as far as, I don't think this was any kind of a milestone win. They've had plenty of wins like this over the last few years, but considering all the circumstances that you just laid out and what had happened to them in their first two home games, I mean, the Ravens were, let's face it, they were a Justin Tucker miss, which you never take for granted what he does, as extraordinary as it is, as automatic as it feels.
He's a system kicker, Luke. He's a system kicker.
It's great. It's just incredible what he does. But the point is, they came quite close to their first 0-3 home start in franchise history on Sunday night, but they didn't. And everything you just mentioned, they deserve credit for. And for me, this was an exhale kind of game. As much as last week's game, the loss to Buffalo was a hyperventilate game, this was an exhale. Everything's fine, right? First place in the AFC North, you're back over 500. The sky's not falling. Hey, Ronnie Stanley came back, and hey, the defense played much better, as you mentioned. And Jason Pierre-Paul looked really good. A couple batted passes, a big sack to end a drive. So you're seeing some elements that you're excited about. Now, doesn't mean that everything's perfect. You mentioned it, and Marcus Williams is a big loss. John Harbaugh said he's going to miss, quote, significant time. Does that mean he's out for the season, or does that mean he's out till December? It's going to be a while, right? I would assume we're going to see him go on IR. It's going to be that kind of thing. And then it's going to be a question of when and if he can come back. So, hey.
Welcome, Kyle Hamilton.
Well, it was Geno Stone on Sunday night more so than Kyle Hamilton, but certainly both of them will come under the microscope because we saw what Marcus Williams, early struggles aside, he was playing really well for this secondary. So, it's not as though everything's perfect, and there are things that need to clean up, and there were things about Sunday night's game that still need to be better. But boy, you feel so much better about improving when it comes via victory, right? There are always things to clean up, and so many things we can talk about. Strengths and weaknesses from Sunday night would have been the same, but the final score could have been a different, and we'd be talking with a much different tone. So that's where you look at this team right now. They're 3-2. They're first place in the division, game in hand against Cincinnati. That's big. That's big for approaching mid-October. This team is on its way. And certainly a big win on Sunday night that they really needed at this stage of the season.
We'll worry about the Bills and the Chiefs winning or losing. We'll talk a little bit about the league all week long. We'll get ready for the New York Giants this week. We have a Maryland Crab Cake Tour stop for my birthday on Friday, October the 14th, a special day for me and John Wooden and Dwight Eisenhower and a few others, as well as Harry Anderson, from the late, great Harry Anderson from Night Court. We'll be giving away the Ravens scratch-off tickets with the top prize of $20,000 on Friday. We'll be at Fadley's. We're doing a special morning thing. I got to get the birthday thing out because I'm fending off all of these Facebook birthday wishes that come in my way. Feel free to throw me a note over. Make sure you've read up on my Chad Steele piece as well. It's out at BaltimorePositive.com. Luke is going to be out in Owings Mills all week because they let him. I will be here all week because I feel like it. Now, of course, I'll be at Fadley's on Friday. All of it brought to you by our friends at Goodwill and our friends at Window Nation as well. I am Nestor. He is Luke. Plenty of football ahead. First place football. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.